In this course, I will teach you the basics of test-driven development while building a simple Angular web application. My name is Eric Mirgaliev, and I've used test-driven development to professionally build front-end applications for the last 5 years. After completing this course, you will have confidence to use test-driven development when building your next Angular application. In this course, you will build an app with a few simple features where for each feature, you will write a test first, make it pass by adding code, and then refactor it to meet these standards. I designed this course for developers who want to start using test-driven development and all of its benefits, but struggle to write that very first failing test. Enroll for this course now and write this first test within minutes. In this video, we jumpstart our project. We start with installing Angular CLI, then use Angular CLI to create a new application. Then for that application, create two components, header and homes. Now let's open the project in VS Code and update the main HTML template to use those two new components. Now let's check it out in the browser. There they are. And the last step is to install UIKit CSS framework. We'll use npm for that. Along with the UIKit, we also install jQuery because it's a dependency. Then we head to Angular JSON file and add jQuery and UIKit JavaScript libraries to the application scripts. Then go to styles file and import the standard UIKit theme. Save, make sure the app reloads successfully, and we're done. In this section, you will build this application header using test-driven development. In real scenario, the design for this header can be a mock-up from a designer, or simple wireframe in your notebook, or even an image in your head. The most important thing here is that test-driven development forces you to think about figuring out the most essential functionality first, and then the looks and appearance second. So let's get started. In this video, we are going to build the top part of the header, which is the navbar, which contains logo, search, and menu. So let's add the logo first using test-driven development, where we add the test first, then make it pass. Before we do that, let's start our test runner and at the same time start the web server for the application. Here we see the default tests passing, and then in another tab we load our application. And remember, for now, it's nothing but just two fresh components that have nothing but these strings. So we are going to turn this header into a navbar. Open VS Code, navigate to the test file, and create a first test that checks that the logo is displayed. We'll call it should show logo. Add a little bit of spacing around, and then use the fixture object and its native element to query the template to check that the logo is present on the page. And instead of using CSS classes for querying elements, we're going to use a specialized data test attribute. Now let's check our test runner. And it is failing because the logo is not present yet. So let's add the logo in VS Code, navigate to the template, and make this test pass in the simplest fashion possible by simply declaring the element with the data test attribute equals logo. Now check the test runner, and we just made our very first test pass. Now let's repeat this with search and menu. Back to the test file, add a couple more tests, should show search, and should show menu. Check the test runner. See our failures. Go back to the template and add the missing elements. Check the test runner again and see passing tests. And at this point, we completed the most essential functionality that our navbar supposed to have, which at this point is just displaying logo, search, and menu. Now we move on to the refactoring step of TDD, which in our case is simply styling the looks according to the design spec, which is, remember the image where it looks like this, but what we've built in our app we see is just these three elements. So now we need to turn these into what they supposed to look like. And since this course is not about styling, but about test-driven development, I'm going to skip the step where I turn it into a pretty thing and just show you the end result, where I add all the necessary markup and UIKit classes to make the navbar look like the design spec. But the most important thing to note here is that logo, search, and menu still maintain their data test attributes that indicate that these elements are still present on the page, as you see here, here, and here. So if we check our test runner, we'll see that all three tests are still passing. And if we check the app, we see that it now has properly styled logo, search, and menu. Next, you will build the bottom part of navbar using the exact same approach. In this video, you will build the bottom portion of the header, which is the list of filter buttons. And remember, what we have in our application already is the navbar with logo, search, and menu, so we just need to add the bottom part. We start with the tests, navigate to the test file, and add a test for the filter buttons. So there are 6 buttons. Let's add assertions for all of them. First is home type, then dates, then guests, then price, rooms, and amenities. Check the test runner, see the failure, and then go to the template and add those filter buttons. Again, it's home type, dates, guests, price, rooms, and amenities. Check the test runner. All tests are passing. And that fulfills the main function of the header, displaying the navbar and the filter buttons. But again, if we look at them now, they don't look like the design specification. And to fix that is the third step in the test-driven development, which is refactoring, which is in our case, making it look pretty. So again, I skip the styling part here and just paste what I already have. That achieves the look of the design spec, but at the same time, it maintains the data test attributes that keep the tests passing. So let's double check the test runner again. It's passing, and the looks are according to the design. As you just experienced, TDD can be very simple. If you choose to use it in this way, it can be a simple, lightweight guide to building the most essential functionality in your application, where it helps you figure out how to make your app useful first, and then worry about the appearance. In the next section, we will take it up a notch and use TDD to help us build something more complicated than a simple header. In this section, we'll build the part of the application that shows a list of homes. Of course, we'll use tests to guide our development. First, we'll build a rudimentary list of homes with stubbed data and no styling. Then we'll add details to each individual home, such as home title, location, and image. After we're done with the presentational part of the homes list, we'll add and mock a data service that will be used for fetching homes from a mocked backend. Then we'll update the service to make real HTTP calls. And lastly, we'll style the homes list to look like the design specification. But before we dive into this section, I would like to ask you to consider giving a review to this course. It doesn't have to be something long or complex. The reason I'm asking for a review is because it will help other students decide if this course is right for them, and it will help me improve this course in whatever the way you think it can be improved. Thank you in advance, and let's get started. In this video, we'll write our first test for the homes component that will verify that the component displays a few homes. Then we'll make that test pass in the simplest, quickest fashion possible. So let's jump into the test file for homes component and repurpose this default test to testing that the component shows a few homes. Again, we'll use the fixture object and its native element to query elements that we expect the component to render. But in this case, we use querySelectorAll method, which is in comparison to querySelector, returns an array of all elements that it finds instead of just the first element that it finds. We'll be looking for the elements that have data test equals home attribute, and we will expect that the length of this array will be equal to 3, meaning that we expect 3 elements to be rendered by the component that have data test home attribute. Now let's see our test failing. There it is. It expects 3 homes, but 0 found. Let's open the component template to fix that. And the simplest way to pass it is to hardcode 3 elements with data test equals home attribute. Check the test again, and it's passing. But of course, that's not how real-world applications work. In a real app, the list of homes will come from the API backend as a result of an HTTP call. So the component would make that HTTP call, and typically it would save the result into a property. So let's go to the controller file of the component and declare that property. We'll call it homes. The $sign indicates that it will contain an observable. Then usually in ng-on-init function, we use some kind of service to have it make that HTTP call for us, and then we grab the result and save it into the homes property. But since we don't have this service yet, we can't use it, so let's comment it out and instead hardcode the result of calling that service into the homes variable using of function from RxJS, which returns an observable. Notice the import on top of the file. So here we add an array, and what you would typically get from the backend is an array of objects where each object is an individual home, and let's say each home will have a title, an image URL, and a physical location. Let's say this will return 3 different homes, one in New York, one in Boston, and one in Chicago. Once we have data in our homes property, we can go back to the template and update it to loop through that property and display each individual home from the array. You use ng-for structural directive from Angular core for that, where it will be let home of homes property, and you need to subscribe to it because it's an observable. And now this should produce 3 elements with data test home, and keep our test passing. Let's check the test. And it is passing. And when we load our app in a browser, we see this list of homes here, which is just for now. Next, we'll update inside of this ng4 loop to display details about each individual home, such as title, location, and image. Since we have the code for listing individual homes, in this video we'll add a test for verifying that the component shows title, image, and location for each individual home, and then we'll make that test pass. So open Homes component test file and add the test for showing home info. And the first thing that we're going to do here is to grab the very first home that the component renders using query selector method, and then we query this home to try to find its title and its inner text property to verify that it equals to home1, which is according to our stubbed data from the homes component controller. Now the test should fail because there's no home title yet. So open Homes component template file and add the element that will show the home title. Make sure to add data test equals title attribute so that our test can find it. Then we can see that our test is passing. Now let's take care of the part of displaying the location and image for each individual home. So open Homes component test file and add a couple of assertions for location and image. Note that for image, we're just verifying that the element is present rather than trying to look inside of it. This is just to make things simpler. Now the test is expectedly failing. So let's go to the Homes component template file and add the elements for showing location and image. Make sure they have our data test attributes. And that makes our tests pass. And if we load our application, it looks like this. And never mind that images are broken for now, we'll fix it later. In the next video, we'll fix the stubbed data in the Homes component controller so that it properly comes from a service. Now we have all the essential functionality of the Homes component built out. It displays the list of homes with details about each home. So now in this video, we'll remove the hard-coded list of homes from the component controller and replace it with a call to a data service that will fetch the list of homes from the API using HTTP call behind the scenes. So from the perspective of the Homes component, it will have no knowledge of how the list of homes is obtained. It will simply rely on the data service to do so, and that will make it easier to properly mock the list of homes in the Homes component tests. So the first thing we'll do is comment out the hard-coded list of homes and uncomment the line that we added to imitate the call to the data service to get the list of homes. And obviously this data service doesn't exist yet. So let's quickly make sure that our tests are properly failing, and they do. And to fix that, let's open a terminal window and generate the data service. We'll use Angular CLI for that. And after it's generated, we open Homes component controller and inject the newly created data service. And now it highlights that we are trying to call a method on this service that doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and add that. For now, let's have it return an observable with an empty array and add a to-do that later will turn this into a real HTTP call to get homes. Now the call to get homes is not highlighted red anymore. So it's a good time to go and check our tests. And now it fails, not because of some error, but because by default, getHomes returns an empty array, and therefore there are no homes are displayed during the test run. So the next thing we need to do is to mock the getHomes method to return our mocked data. To do so, we'll install a Jasmine ES6 Spies utility using npm, and then go into the test file of the homes component, import the SpyOnClass utility from Jasmine ES6 Spies, and then update the providers property of the test configuration to provide a mocked version of the data service instead of the real one. This will allow us to mock its methods. But before we can do that, let's add a variable that we will use to store the reference to the mocked service. And then we can use it in our first test to grab the reference to the data service. And the beauty of the SpyOnClass utility is that you can mock methods doing data service, getHomes, and return value, and then we'll have it return our mock data from the controller. And one little caveat here is that when you're mocking things, you need to move the detect changes statement to run after your mocking statements. And then our expect statement stays as is, and it's a good time to check our test. But first, we need to restart our test runner because we just installed a new testing utility. And once that's reloaded, we see that our test for verifying that there are 3 homes are displayed is now passing, but our test for verifying the home info such as title, location, and image is failing. And that's because we didn't mock the data for the second test. So let's open the test file again and fix it by extracting the mocking code into a before each statement so it runs before each test. And that fixes all tests. So even though the tests are passing now, if we load our app in the browser, we see that it doesn't show any homes. And that's because the data service getHomes method temporarily returns an empty array. Next, we'll update the service to make a real HTTP call to fetch the list of homes. Now, it's time to update our data service to make a real HTTP call to fetch the list of homes using HTTP client. And guess what? We will do it in a test-driven development fashion, where we add the test first and then build the service to make it pass. Before we dive into the tests, we need to update app module file to import HTTP client module from Angular core. Now open the data service test file and repurpose this default test to make sure that the data service properly works to do the single most important thing it is designed to do, which is return the list of homes. And sometimes with tests like these, I make a few notes using comments on what I think I need to accomplish to make this test work. So in this case, we'll need to do a few things. First, we'll need to spy on and mock the HTTP client. Then we'll need to use our service to try to get the list of homes. And then we'll need to verify that the service returned our mocked data as it's supposed to. And then we'll need to verify that the service called the correct HTTP endpoint. So let's go ahead and import HTTP client testing module so we can properly mock things out. We also declare a variable that we will use for referencing our mocked HTTP client. Now let's grab that reference from the test bed and then create a variable that will contain our familiar array of mocked homes. And then we'll spy on HTTP client get method and have it return an observable of our array of homes. Then the next step is to grab the reference to our actual service that we're testing. Let's declare that reference as well. And then create a spy that we will use for assertions. And then subscribe to the data service getHomes method with our spy. And then we expect our spy to have been called with our mocked data. And this is our test. So let's go ahead and check our test runner and see how it expectedly fails. Now let's open the data service and update getHomes method to actually use HTTP client to try to fetch the list of homes. For now, we'll have it calling foobar endpoint because it doesn't really matter if we're trying to make our current test pass. Our current test doesn't assert against which endpoint it is calling. So now our test is passing. Now let's head to the test file and take care of the fact that the service should be calling the proper endpoint. And in our case, our backend will be a simple homes JSON file in the assets folder. Now let's see how the test fails because we're not calling the expected endpoint yet. So let's make it pass by updating getHomes method to call the correct endpoint. And now the test passes. However, if we try to load our application in the browser, it still will not display the list of homes. And that's because our assets folder does not yet have the homes JSON file. So let's go ahead and create one. And we will use our familiar array of mocked homes in a JSON format. And then if we load our application in the browser, we see that it displays our homes. The only thing we need to fix here is the image that's missing from the assets file. So let's add that. And then when we check the application, we see that it loads it successfully. So now we have 100% functionality in. And the next step is to style this list according to the design spec. Now we have everything working as expected, and it's time to make the home list look according to the design specification. And after updating the homes component, we'll use our existing tests to make sure that we didn't break any existing functionality. So remember, at the moment, this is what our home list looks like. And this is what we need it to be. So let's open Homes component template. And here, I paste already prepared piece of code that uses all the fancy UIKit classes to style the home list according to the design specification. It puts the entire list into a container so that it adds some nice margin and padding to it. And then it adds page title, which is homes. And then it puts the list of homes into a grid so that it becomes responsive for different screen sizes. And then it puts each individual home into a card, again for some borders and paddings and margins. And then it puts the image into a media top element of the card. And then it puts the title and location into a card body. And then at the same time, It maintains the data test attributes for image, title, and location to allow our existing tests to still find these elements and pass. Now, if we reload our app, we see that it looks like as it's supposed to. And when we check the test runner, we see that all the tests are still passing. In this section, you've learned how test-driven development can help you with building the Homes List feature of the application. With every part of the Homes List feature, you've started with a simple quick test, made it pass in the quickest way possible, then refactored the code according to standards. You've started with building a simple list of homes, then added title, location, and image to it, and then updated the code and tests to work with a data service for fetching the list of homes from the backend. Then you style the homes list according to the design specification. In this section, we're going to learn how to use test-driven development methodology to build more complex functionality compared to the previous section. So what we're going to do here is to add the ability to book each one of those individual homes. So we'll start by adding a book button to every one of those. And when you would click on that button, what you're going to see is something that I sketched out on a piece of paper. And it will be a dialog where it will display the title of the home, and it will show what's the cost of the home per night, and it will provide you fields to enter check-in date and check-out date. And based on these dates and the price per night, it will calculate the total cost of the booking. And then you would click on the big book button. It will submit a request to the fake backend. And then when the backend returns a response, the dialog will close and it will show you a success message. And you'll get back to this list of homes. All right, let's get to it. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that every lecture in this section includes a link to GitHub that looks like this. It takes you to the compare page where it compares one branch with another branch. And when you open such page, what it shows you is the exact changes in the code base I introduce with each lecture. So for example, this page shows all the changes that I made in the lecture where I am adding a book button to the home listing. So here you could see that I added this button to the homes component, and I added the test here too, and then all the related changes that I had to introduce. I think this is very helpful when you are following along with the changes in the videos, so I suggest you would open each one of those links with every lecture that you follow, and it should help you to understand what's going on in the code base, and I hope you find it very helpful. All right, let's get started.